We'll give it a moment or two. It is the 9th of May, if you can believe it, 2019. Thanks so much for joining us tonight as we work on the wonderful things we get a chance to address on such a gorgeous evening. It's a gorgeous Thursday evening. So for you to be in the audience, it means that you are passionate about affordable housing, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Thanks, committee members, for being here tonight. If everyone has not, a couple items to go over. If you have not grabbed a packet of information, which is back at the sign-in, 2 tables back there, please do. Also, if you have not signed in, please do. We'd like to capture your information so that you can be made aware of or kept abreast of what's going on with the Northeast housing strategies. And then also at that same table, if you have a desire to have public comment, we have a moment at the end of our meeting where there's an opportunity for you to weigh in and share comments, thoughts, etc. Now, I say this at every meeting, and that is, this is a meeting open to the public, but not a public meeting. And what that means is that you're welcomed to be in the environment as you listen to the work of the Oversight Committee dealing with and interacting with the City of Portland and the nonprofit partners. And so we follow along the agenda, and you're welcomed, as I said, to hear and observe. This is not the gathering where the public weighs in. So that's the difference between a meeting that's open to the public and a public meeting. I think the other housekeeping items that I want to tell you about, the restroom is right back, as you can see, back in the corner. And other than that, I think we're ready to go. I'm Dr. Stephen Holt, and I chair this Oversight Committee. Again, welcome. Several of you have already done this also. Please take advantage of the wonderful food that is provided tonight. I'm sure that those who brought it in don't necessarily want to take it home. So, all right, we're going to get going. I think that's everything I needed to cover. Is there anything else? Excellent. Let's start with Tanya and Jennifer. Jennifer 1 and Jennifer 2. Give us an update on the Metro bond.
Okay. Hello. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity for having us come and speak with you tonight. We're really excited to discuss the Metro's regional housing bond. But first, I want to frame that discussion with a little bit of an update on the implementation of Portland's housing bond. So as you recall, Portland voters passed a historic bond for affordable housing back in 2016. And through an extensive public process, Portland has already developed a community-driven framework plan for how we're implementing that bond. The goals and priorities, outcomes, and strategies that we've used over the past 2 years offer us a starting point for discussion for planning and implementing the Metro bond resources. So to begin, Portland's bond policy framework lays out clear production goals to be achieved. Those include 13 total units of affordable housing for households with incomes at or below 60% area median income. Also included are 600 units for households at 0 to 30% AMI or area median income, 300 permanent supportive housing units, and 650 or half of the 1,300 total units for family size units, meaning 2 bedrooms or larger. The framework also calls out a commitment to further our community-wide goals on preventing displacement, advancing racial equity, and making a visible impact on ending homelessness. Our bond investments focus on creating housing opportunities for communities disproportionately affected by the housing crisis, such as communities of color, families, including families with children, immigrant and refugees, and intergenerational households, and households experiencing homelessness or at imminent risk for displacement. We also wanted to point out that people living with a disability are an important group that are included in the framework that often intersects with one or all of the above communities, and that our goal to create supportive housing units is specific to serving households living with a disability. Another important priority is location. The Bureau assesses all acquisitions with a racial equity lens and prioritizes balancing our investments throughout the city. Additionally, we have a focus on new construction in high opportunity areas and acquisition of existing housing in areas with high vulnerability. Other important considerations that we include are investments where there is little or no existing housing resources, and also considering school catchment areas and planned transit and infrastructure projects. One of our bond framework guidelines supports and increases equity in contracting and workforce opportunities for certified disadvantaged minority women, emerging small business, and service-disabled veteran-owned business enterprises. Beyond the city's aspirational goals, under PHB, the bond has goals to meet 26% certified firms for our subcontractors, and by the time that our bond projects are in construction, by 2021, we estimate that we will have reached our maximum goal of requiring 30% certified firms. We also have a goal of professional services, 20% of those billings to be included in our projects, as well as the City of Portland's Workforce Training and Hiring Program, which currently applies to subcontracts of $300,000 or more, where we require 20% of apprenticeable hours to be performed by state-registered apprentices, and striving in good faith to employ women and minority contractors. Our progress to date includes 6 bond-identified investments throughout the City of Portland, meeting one of our policy framework goals. Of these, this map that we have here, where you can see all 6 properties, also illustrates not only where our investments are currently located, but also where we need to look further to meet all of our goals, to further prioritize our location preferences and priorities. So the further progress that we'll go through right now is focused on our 2 bond projects that are currently operating, the Ellington and the East Burnside Apartments. And to date, for those 2 complexes, we are housing 623 residents, including 300 children, and we've done that using key strategies of low barrier screening criteria and coordinated lease-up with community partners. That includes advance notification to culturally specific and homeless family agencies, and partnership and collaboration with the City-County Joint Office of Homeless Services and their mobile family team, which is comprised of 8 agencies, 6 of which are culturally specific. Since April 2017, a total of 159 new households have moved into bond-funded housing. Of those, 71% of the households placed have been referred through community partner agencies. Some of those agencies include Urban League, SEI, Join, IRCO, NARA, NEA, Human Solutions, and others. And of those, 71%, or 45 households, were referred from culturally specific agencies. Looking further at each individual project, starting with the Ellington Apartments, which includes 263 apartments, we have some resident data that we have been collecting, and what we have been able to see is that the population at the Ellington Apartments is more racially and ethnically diverse than the surrounding Census Tract areas. Specifically, households from the African American, Native American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latinx, and multiracial communities are higher than the surrounding Census Tract. And we also have been shown that households from the Asian communities are much lower than what appears to be in the surrounding Census Tract. I also want to point out that for this complex in particular, we have a high percentage, 28% of folks who chose not to disclose any demographic information. And we believe this is in part, a big part of the fact that this building was an acquisition with existing residents residing in it, and we began gathering demographics upon the turnover of vacant units at that property and further surveys that we collected. So, and then just a number of people that chose not to disclose at that time. So looking at it from an income point of view, we know that 93 households at the Ellington are earning less than 30% of the area median income, and 117 households are making between 31% and 60% area median income. We also have just begun to deploy the 52 project-based Section 8 vouchers that were committed to this project. We began taking applications in January, and we had 90 applicants for just the existing residents at that community. So we're excited to get those implemented and in place for folks. Looking further at the East Burnside Apartments, we can see that Burnside has a higher representation, again, of African American and Native American Alaskan natives than the surrounding Census Tract, but a lower representation of Hispanic, Latinx, and Asians, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. So these numbers kind of demonstrate kind of our intentional work towards working efforts to work with culturally specific and other community partners in helping us to create housing opportunities for our priority communities. However, it's also showing us that we have some work, further work to do to revise and incorporate other strategies to reach the other communities that are demonstrating lower representation at our properties than the surrounding area. But back to incomes for East Burnside, we have collected 33% of our households there are earning between 0 and 30% area median income, and 18 are at 31 to 60%. And again, what the difference between kind of when you look back at the Ellington and East Burnside is that East Burnside was a new building that we purchased, and we got to lease up using all of the screening criteria and requirements under a Portland housing bond framework. So more recently, we just last week released a bond opportunity solicitation for $77 million worth of resources. 70 million of that is bond resources. That solicitation includes 3 properties. We believe that this solicitation will produce about 350 to 600 new housing units. All of the units will be offered at 60% area median income or below, with a third of those total units going for 0 to 30% area median income restricted units. We also are planning for supportive housing throughout the offering and the solicitation, with including 2 100% PSH housing projects. And we have a maximum subsidy of bond subsidy that we're offering through the solicitation, $150,000 per unit for new construction projects, and $100,000 per unit for acquisition and rehab of existing buildings. Again, if you think back to the map that we showed earlier with the location of our existing bond identified properties, 3 of which are in the solicitation, we are also focusing our location priorities through the solicitation in the areas where we don't currently have housing identified, that being North Portland, Southwest Portland, and East Portland, particularly east of I-205. And the properties included in the solicitation, just as a refresher, are a property in the Coley neighborhood on Northeast Prescott Street, which will be a new construction project, and 2 supportive housing projects, the West Wind and the Joyce Hotel, which are both downtown. Anyone has any questions?
Thank you very much. Oversight Committee, do you have any questions for Tanya? Thank you.
I do have a question. Your slides where you're talking about resident demographics, I think what I heard you saying was this is that you were making some comparison of the representation in the building to the surrounding census tract of the building. Can you explain to me conceptually what that means? How is that a meaningful indicator of equity?
Well, we're looking at that to try to figure out how well we are able to communicate opportunities and people in the surrounding neighborhood are able to access the opportunities that become available to them in their neighborhood for that existing housing. We know that many people are looking for housing everywhere, but folks that currently reside in one neighborhood or other often are looking for opportunities to stay within that neighborhood. So we're looking at what are how well are we reaching through outreach and referrals and partnerships the current demographics of that existing neighborhood through marketing and other ways.
Do you also have a metric where you assess the representation relative to the actual needs in the population, housing needs that are defined for the particular groups that we're looking at?
Could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what do you mean about that?
Well, to me, an equitable representation in affordable housing development would relate to our sense of the overall housing needs and populations that we have in the city. So I'm having some trouble grasping conceptually why this is a neighborhood-bounded representativeness measure rather than looking at the proportional representation to the populations who need housing. For example, people who are below 30% AMI who are rent burdened, people who are 30 to 60% AMI, and the racial demographics there, rather than the racial demographics of the census tract that a property happens to be in.
You want to take that?
Thank you, Dr. Bates. It's Shannon Callahan at the Portland Housing Bureau. We do also look at that information. That's not how the presentation tonight is aligned, but we'd be happy to get that for you so that you can compare that to both of the properties, which have a little bit different of a demographic mix. I think 105 East Burnside is a little bit more reflective for us about what we're hoping to achieve in terms of balance, as it is a building that we were able to buy and tenant up from the ground up, whereas the Ellington property, we did not displace any tenants with that purchase, so we took the building or the property as we found it with the tenants that were in the existing building. We've been able to achieve a lot of new tenants based on natural attrition, but we did not actually implement any kind of required move-outs for over-income tenants. So, but thank you for that suggestion to make that more clear in our presentation. I think that's very helpful. We do track it, but we will bring that back to you. So thank you, Dr. Bates.
I would just suggest being very careful with the use of the census tract the building is in as a metric for some kind of equity outcome. You know, the building targets, particularly for acquisition, are somewhat opportunistic. And while there may be a larger neighborhood target that includes a diverse population, you know, census tract boundaries are a little bit idiosyncratic. And so to imagine success as based on a kind of externally imposed geography of that kind, although it's easy for measurement purposes, may not quite get us to our goals.
Thank you. I appreciate that question and feedback. And it was really only intended as just one form of an indicator of where we're going. So we obviously are going to be digging deeper and having a much broader breadth of indicators and measures for all of those elements.
Excellent. Any other question from Oversight Committee? If you would go to page, oh, sorry, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wanting to know how saturated is the housing in North Portland, since we've been working for a long time trying to be able to provide housing for the African American population. Are we completely, there's no more property, or have we left that? And it sounds like we're going out into other areas, and I know there's a crisis in the city, but can you explain the plan there?
In Northeast, you mean?
In the Northeast
Yes.
community. Yeah, I think, you know, our goals are, as I had reviewed for, is to spread bond investments throughout all parts of the city, so it's not located in one particular part or another, because we know that folks live in all parts of the city that need housing. what we've identified so far is really what opportunities were available to us, not for want of trying or looking in those other locations. And so that is part of this bond solicitation that we've just released, why we do have a strong location preference for those areas where you don't currently have any identified resources for that bond. So I don't know, I have the numbers at my fingertips of what saturation levels or what's available in North Portland at this moment, but.
Is there anyone working on it or still involved in that?
I'm not sure. I
Okay.
deferred that one.
May I clarify your question? Are you asking about acquisitions that may be?
Turn your mic on. There you go.
Are you asking about actively looking for acquisitions in North and Northeast Portland in particular? And the answer to your question would be yes. We're still looking to acquire properties both within the URA and without the URA in North and Northeast. This presentation is specific to one particular chunk of the funds that we have available to us, which is the voter-approved bond. And we are looking especially at North Portland for an acquisition. I would also like to note that we did include a requirement that in this solicitation where we're putting out money to the community to bring in projects for us to rank and rate, that if anyone is bringing us a project that is within the interstate urban renewal area, that they will be required to use the North and Northeast strategy preference policy. I thought that would be of interest to you, but yes, we're still actively looking into your, we are actively in negotiations, cross my fingers, on a property right now within the URA.
Excellent. Page 4 on the presentation, where we're talking about outcomes to date, 623 residents, 159 new households. Great information, thank you very much. 71% referred through community partners. Of those, 45 households were referred from culturally specific agencies. Do we have any delineated information? Meaning, how many of these families were Black families that were referred, and if they were referred, did they then go through a lease up and secure housing? Do we have that kind of information available?
There we go. We have information on the folks who were housed, who got placed in the housing, not necessarily all the way through the chain yet. This is something that we're going to look into a little further and see what disaggregated data that we can collect. It's our understanding that right now, the current practice for many at the property management level is that during the pre-application and screening process, there's no demographic information collected. There's lots of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with preventing bias and discrimination through that process. So typically, demographics aren't collected until applicants have passed the screening and application criteria and have been offered housing at that point. And then based upon whatever funding requirements are in place for that particular project, then demographics are collected. And even then, it's still voluntary on the part of the applicant, clearly. But yes, we've recognized there's a gap in the system in terms of demographic collection, and we're going to be exploring where along the chain we can work to improve that and kind of link those up so we can collect better information throughout the process.
I appreciate that. That's well, Jennifer, were you going to weigh in before I make a
I was just going to say that an additional piece of being able to disaggregate or around the 45 households is we do know the referring agency. And so but that doesn't get, it doesn't get to the point of the actual demographics of the household that was housed. It's another point of data of the referring source and which organizations they came from and what the missional focus of that referring agency is. So.
kind of to Dr. Bates' point, and in reference to leading with, or this being an equity lens, and specifically a racial equity lens, since we know that people of color are more impacted than anyone else in this present housing market, right? And then beyond that, Black people are the most impacted. So if we're not measuring it, how do we know that we're moving it? And that's kind of the concern. That's the absolute concern that I have, and I think that our Oversight Committee has as it relates to this work. So I don't know how we can drill down, but I think drilling down, and then the other side of that is how can we begin to identify bias if we're not tracking this process and correcting those actions. So as you continue to work on that, we'd like to get some, at least I would, some kind of insight as to how we're going to do that. Thank you very much. Jennifer.
So good afternoon, committee members. I'm Jennifer Chang. I work with Tanya at the Housing Bureau working on the bond. And so Tanya gave a great summary around the progress of our Portland housing bond. And I'm excited to be able to share with this committee an introduction to our first regional housing bond that was passed by Metro in November of 2018. The Portland bond and our progress helps to provide a helpful background and context for how we plan for and think about this second bond. And so I think that information will be useful as we move forward into hearing your questions and perspectives on what we can do different or what we can continue to do as the city looks to implement the Metro bond in collaboration with our partners. So in November of 2018, voters in the greater Tri-County area passed a regional bond. It is $652 million, and that's across the 3 counties of Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas. It's estimated to produce 3,900 new homes, so that's across the Tri-County area, and those homes will help serve 12,000 individuals. So the information from this overview, as well as what I'll share in the following slides, are taken directly from the framework plan that was formed and adopted by the Metro City Council. They went through a very extensive community process last year involving a lot of community partners and stakeholders to identify basically a framework plan for the Metro bond. So the production goals for the bond are region-wide, again, the 3,900 affordable homes, and there's some sub-goals within that. There's a strong focus on deeply affordable homes, so 1,600 homes at affordable for households earning 30% of area median income or below. Half of the units will be family-sized, so 2 bedrooms or larger, and also no more than 10% of the total bond funds can be made for units that are affordable for households earning up to 80% area median income. The bond is, there's several allowable uses of the bond that includes being able to, it's focused on construction, it's focused on capital purposes, so it can be used to construct new housing and also acquire existing buildings. There's also an allowed use of using funds for home ownership opportunities. Similar to our Portland bond, the Metro framework calls out several communities which are in need of housing that should be prioritized for funds and housing opportunities. These include communities of color, families with children and multiple generations, people living with disabilities, seniors, veterans, and households experiencing homelessness or imminent displacement. Metro plans to allocate the bond in partnership with 7 other jurisdictional partners. So in looking at the total amount, which is $652 million, it'll be distributed across 8 different jurisdictional partners, Metro being one, and then 7 other jurisdictions. Within Multnomah County, there's 3. There's the City of Portland, also Home Forward, who is overseeing the unincorporated Multnomah County portion, and then also the City of Gresham. Other partners are the City of Hillsborough, Beaverton, the Washington County Housing Authority, and Clackamas County Housing Authority. So there's several numbers and funds that Metro provided for jurisdictional partners. This table summarizes the allocation that Metro has provided for housing to be created in the City of Portland. So a total of 1,475 units, and of that, the breakout of the 30% AMI as well as family size production, and then a total of $211 million. In terms of next steps and the general timeline over the next several months and years, there are several major steps and actions that are currently being taken as we prepare to implement the bond. So currently, we are in the process of engaging with our community partners and community members to hear from them, to hear from the community regarding how those important priorities that should be included in how we implement this bond. So we'll be doing that over the next several months through July. And then in July and August, Portland will be developing a local implementation strategy. Metro has asked and required all jurisdictions to form this local plan, which is basically the roadmap for how we'll spend and implement and invest funds in our jurisdictions. Then in both in this year through next year, we'll be in the process of executing intergovernmental agreements with Metro, and then in 2020, hopefully we'll plan around implementing the bond funds. In terms of oversight for the Metro bond, there's a governance group called the Community Oversight Committee. They were seated in July. There's 13 members from across the region, and they're responsible for reviewing and approving, reviewing and providing changes to the local plans that then go before the Metro Council. The committee also monitors progress, provides annual reporting, and also offers recommendations to the jurisdictional partners regarding implementation. So there are several similarities between the 2 housing bonds, and we highlighted several of those in our update around the Portland bond. Both bonds have racial equity as a leading principle. There's priority communities that are identified. There's very firm production targets around creating apartments and homes and bedroom sizes. There are definitely some differences between the Metro and Portland bond. For one, the Metro bond allows or has no current operating subsidies that are connected to the funds to support the deeply affordable units, and there's no regional requirement around supportive housing. There are some areas of flexibility with the Metro bond. Those are that up to 10% of funds can be used to support homes that are affordable for households earning up to 80% AMI. And also, as mentioned previously, home ownership is an allowable fund use. So I said, upon hearing the progress that we've made locally with the Portland bond and understanding some more about the Metro Affordable Housing Bond, we'd like to hear your perspectives and questions and recommendations as we prepare and continue to plan for implementing the Metro bond. There's three questions that we have, and I want to read through those questions, but then also open it to just those questions as well as other comments you may have. So the first question we had was for the Metro bond. Should changes be made in the following areas, specifically needed housing types for priority communities or location strategies? That's the first question. The second was what actions should we be taking to increase housing opportunity for African American, Black communities, and other communities of color? And then the third was what considerations should we take into account as we can plan for our implementation plan in Portland? So those are the three questions, and at this time would be glad to answer any questions related to the Metro bond, and also hear thoughts related to how we should implement moving forward. So.
Thank you very much. Oversight Committee members, should we just take a question at a time, or did you have any other question first? Go ahead.
I guess I have a process question, which is you're interested in our input in these three questions, right? And that goes where, or like, is this now a local decision conversation? Is this something that goes back to Metro, who's already assigned a certain distribution of units, or what's the process exactly?
So each local jurisdiction, of which the city of Portland is one, is developing their own local implementation strategy. And so the feedback we're gathering is specific to City of Portland and how we will be implementing the funds here locally. And the information we gather from this discussion, as well as several others that we're having over the next several months, will be compiling and including as to inform how we write up our local plan, so for Portland. And then that, in turn, will need to be brought before the Metro Council. Metro Council is the one that is the one reviewing and approving the final plans for all jurisdictions.
But how does that relate to the production goals? So it seems to me the answer to discussion question 1 could be that those production goals are, in fact, not the right targets, but it sounded to me like those have already been set.
Correct. Yeah. So is the question, if there was feedback around the production goals, where would that go and how would it be brought back? We would bring it back to, as we're drafting our local plan, and as we're presenting it to the Metro Council, I believe. But Shannon, you want?
Dr. Bates, is there something specific about the goals that they've set in terms of production that you're thinking of? I think that would help inform an answer.
Without knowing what all the production goals are for all of the jurisdictions, it's a little difficult to know what the total balance is. I'm curious about how the goals for family size units were set given the priority populations, and this question, should changes be made in terms of needed housing types for priority communities? It seems like several of those priority communities would indicate family size or larger size bedroom units, but only half of the units are allocated that way. And I don't know if that's about half for all the production goal targets, or maybe there's other jurisdictions that actually are going to be producing more along those lines.
So the goals are proportionally divided amongst all of the participating jurisdictions. So each jurisdiction is required to produce a minimum of the same amount of those goals to be eligible for the Metro funding. So the dollar amount was essentially divided amongst it's a little more complicated than that, but was essentially divided amongst the jurisdictions. The same percentage of 0 to 30, which is roughly 41% of the total, so deeply affordable, or 41%. and about half exactly are required to be family size. Now, those are the base goals that Metro has indicated for each jurisdiction, but the feedback I'm hearing from you would be that we should be looking to achieve greater family size units to reach the priorities under the goal. So we could, as a jurisdiction, we can't go below these goals as a recommendation, but we could work to exceed those goals. So if I understood correctly, you'd be asking us to do greater numbers of family size.
And just for your reference, I can forward Metro's housing, the bond work plan. The complete document has appendices and tables that delineate the goals by jurisdiction. And as Shannon mentioned, it's proportionate to what you see with Portland's.
Weigh in.
Earlier, as the family size, I think I remember you said 2 bedrooms. Is there a way we can make family size mean at least 3 bedrooms or more? 2 bedrooms are just not serving the folks that we're trying to serve.
Yes, thank you for that. So the recommendation is when we talk about family size, emphasize the importance of 3 and higher. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Karen.
Yeah, I don't see it called out specifically in this presentation about the, who will be doing the construction and trying to meet goals for the projects. And so I don't know if it's implied, but it's certainly not called out specifically, and I think it should be, that also the people who are going to help create these houses, you're also trying to meet get racial equity in that as well.
Yes, we have not yet formed the strategy, but are in the process of developing it, and much of that is informed by the work that we've done with the Portland bond, and in that we have included that focus and priority to ensure that when we're looking at advancing equity, it's through all levels, including particularly through the economic opportunities and access to who is involved in developing and constructing the housing. But thank you.
Dr. Bethel, yes.
I want to go back first to ask you about the Oversight Committee. You talked about it. It says it's been appointed. What's the makeup of it? Because if you don't have a good makeup in a committee, you're not going to get good results in the city.
Yes, thank you. I failed to mention Dr. Holt is one member of the committee, and it's. I think, Doctor, I will defer
you
that
look amazing,
question
actually.
to Dr. Holt.
No, point well taken. There are, and I couldn't name all of the members, but you talked about 13 members. One of the things, Serena Cruz is one of them, and Shannon Singleton is one of the co-chairs. And we have been spending quite a bit of time around the leading with racial equity, and that it's got to be more than dialogue and conceptual, and there's significant nuances associated with some of the clarification that has gone into this discussion. But I agree with your point that the makeup of the committee. So I would say that there are some strong voices involved in this work to make sure that economic opportunity, workforce development, capacity building, as well as those who are benefiting from the project are people of color and those who are most impacted. So that is very much a high priority for several of the Metro bond members. Yeah. Any other comments around this work? I think, without kind of restating the obvious, those things that we've always been concerned about are going to be the things that we're concerned about with how these dollars are allocated. We would, we have great opportunity to do deep good and to be very intentional and strategic around addressing people who have been impacted repeatedly through a variety of things. So from work opportunities, work, et cetera, things that we've said. So it would be great to see thoughtful work around how we take these dollars and leverage them to do the greatest good. I think that's going to be our concern and our feedback. Any specifics you want to weigh in on?
Well, I think that there's an opportunity here with these dollars, both sets of dollars. We've talked a lot on this Oversight Committee over a couple of years about the reality that the URA TIF money is limited, it's very limited, and will serve a certain number of people. We hope that many of them will be African-American folks who have experienced displacement or are at risk of experiencing displacement, and they'll be in Northeast Portland. And also, there are already a substantial, significant number of Black folks, whether African-American or African-identified, who live outside of this URA. And this is an opportunity to ensure that they are well served wherever they are living and are stable and secure in their housing wherever they are living. And we don't, I think we, in the city of Portland, capital C, city of Portland, often overlap racial identity and place identity in a way that works okay for some communities, and it's great to have we absolutely respect and honor a place identification that's cultural and has racial significance. But for Black folks who have already been in a diaspora and are everywhere and don't get looped into any of those sort of culturally designated areas in other parts of the city other than Northeast, it's sort of blowing in the wind. And so I want to make it very clear that there are the same work that we've been talking about here that has to be done to serve families in the preference policy in Northeast Portland in terms of the outreach, the information, the communication strategies, the preparation and readiness, the screening. All of those pieces need to be in place and targeted toward Black folks in outer, in East County, in Clackamas, in Washington County, anywhere, but for the purview of this set of staff, that we need to be holding all the partners accountable outside of Northeast strategy to do this work.
Go ahead.
Yes, I was looking at the timeline, and it says 2020 implementation of bond funds. Is there a final date or estimated target date for units, and what does that look like?
I believe that Metro shares a similar timeline to what the Portland Housing Bond established, which is we had wanted all funds committed and developments identified and in process within 7 years. And so I believe that Metro's clock starts ticking on the date that shortly after the voters passed the actual ballot measure. So if we were to have funds released out in 2020, it's likely that we'd see new buildings being constructed as soon as 2022 or 23. It's also possible that we would be doing an acquisition strategy as well. So buying, our partners would be buying existing buildings to prevent displacement. And so that, as we've done with the Portland Housing Bond, so since we already have 2 buildings in operation with Portland Housing Bond 2 years in, and 6 projects total, I'd imagine we'd be in a similar place with Metro 2 years out.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions from the oversight? Well, we appreciate the presentation, the information. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And I guess we should talk about, 2 things. One request, if you could send the questions to me, and then I'll get it out to the Oversight Committee members who were not here. And then we will set a time to kind of come back and kind of keep us abreast of progress, especially as you establish the framework and all that. That'll be fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. PCRI. You are next on the agenda. So updates. Good evening. Hello there.
Okay, that's better. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Maxine Fitzpatrick. I'm Executive Director of Portland Community Reinvestment Initiatives. And today we're going to respond to some of the questions that came up around our development projects. And afterwards, Michelle is going to have something to offer us as well. The first one was King Parks Apartments, and you needed an update on where we are with King Park Apartments. King Plus Parks Apartments. Total construction budget for that development of 70 units is $26,428,000. To date, we've dispersed $3,982,000. That represents 9.51% completion. The project is progressing really well. We're working on getting our sign out. Right now, it's just the contractor's sign that's being shown. No complications so far, no problems. As you know, due to a change in PCRI staff, PCRI was nearly prevented from starting this project, in spite of the fact it had invested $1.5 million of its organizational resources in pre-development expenses. We got beyond that. In terms of the Beatrice Marl, that's a bit more information that we'll need to share. To date, PCRI has incurred expenses related to the lease-up of the Beatrice Marl, and we want to share that with you. The Beatrice Marl building, located on Northeast MLK, is a low-income housing tax credit project, which falls under the city's North and Northeast preference policy. According to the terms of the low-income housing tax credit project financial requirements, the building was due to be fully leased up as of December 31st, 2018. PCRI had contracted with Cascade Management to assist with the lease-up of the building. However, under the terms and conditions of the city's preference policy, which this lease-up process was overseen, directed, and managed by the Portland Housing Bureau. Cascade Management was unable to achieve full lease-up by December 31st, 2018, despite of the fact that the lease-up process started in June 2018. By that date, December 31st, 2018, 6 months later, the project had only 9 tenants, resulting in a 10% occupancy. The delay, as noted, was caused by PCRI. The delay, as I noted, has caused PCRI to have to pay interest on the full amount of the construction loan. That construction loan totaled $9,153,000. It's $153,640. PCRI has had to pay several months' interest on that loan at an average cost of $50,000 a month. The fees are extended for extended loan has cost PCRI an additional $86,848. PCRI has also loaned the project over $60,000 to cover operating expenses due to the building not being fully leased up. In January 2019, with due to just dire stress and many complications with the lease up of the building, PCRI took over the management and lease up of it. Today, for a little over 4 months later, we have it at 74% lease up. I just want to say that PCRI is a unique nonprofit, fortunate enough to, and due to the property management and operational expertise we've had, we managed to have resources to cover the cost of that extraordinary expense. However, the implementation of the preference policy has caused a significant financial burden for the organization, and there are still units sitting empty that could be housing people in the community. I know this report to the committee will cause PCRI more grief and will pose more challenges than we currently endure. However, as members of this committee, we are required to report this information and to report it directly to you. That's what's going on with the Beatrice Morrow. And I have to say, I hope you all have taken the opportunity to go by and see the building. It's an extraordinary development, and it's going to provide some great quality housing for displaced residents. One of the things that I had to grapple with is the continuous reminder, and I've shared this before, just not with this committee, of the fact that we were regularly, ongoing, informed that the application process and lease up of the Beatrice Morrow had to be race neutral. Recently, giving credit to the Portland Housing Bureau, they did have a meeting with organizations like PCRI that also had to comply with the preference policy. And we were able to share some of the challenges and share our thoughts in terms of how that process could have been made much better and could have served the community it was slated to serve. Moving forward with the homeownership construction, PCRI currently has 6 homes under construction, and those are on Blandina. We've recently completed 4 homes, and that was on Williams. Both developments are situated on land owned by PCRI. There are 12 homes in various stages of pre-development, and soon construction is expected to start, and that construction will start sooner than later. PCRI could have had more homes, at least 10 under construction on land it owns. However, at the time, we were restricted from constructing them due to their locations being outside of the interstate urban renewal area. I made a request at the time to develop homes outside the interstate URA and was initially told yes we could, only to be told later that no we could not. I understand now that there is a request has been made to use CDBG funds and that they are now being made available. But as I explained at the time, the establishment of the interstate corridor may have caused a massive displacement. However, families were displaced from more neighborhoods than in North and Northeast Portland. I'm going to be quiet right now and allow Michelle to share with you some of the complications and realities and good things as well that has happened with the Beatrice Morrow lease up.
Hello and good evening. I'm Michelle Cole. I'm the newly hired Director of Property Management for PCRI. So I come with a background in affordable housing of over 23 years. Beatrice Morrow to me is nothing new as far as an affordable housing community. The uniqueness in it is the fact that there is a preference. From my extensive work that I worked with REACH CDC, and understanding what preferences is a big deal. The one thing I am very familiar with is working with Jennifer Michon and getting clarity. And because the property is, we have to remember, is that it's 100% tax credit. So I am to follow by making sure that the affirmative fair marketing plan is written correctly and that the tenant selection plan is written correctly. And in those policies, I have the right to choose a preference to put on those documents in order to comply with tax credit, because that is the first position of the loan. And in that, right now, currently, I believe Cascade did not utilize it correctly because not enough direction was given. And I've been familiar with this information for a while prior to coming, but no definition has been given clarity in how to utilize it. Looking through the Portland Housing Bureau's website, it is clearly written and stated that there is an issue in the city of Portland, in the north and northeast area, and its predominantly issue is for the blacks in the community, which was notated back in the late 90s to early 2000s, that the actual map that is specified on the page on your website says that there's a need to bring housing back. Well, that's the need and the preference that I plan on putting in the tenant selection criteria. Fair housing states that I can utilize that, and I plan on utilizing that to help fulfill the units, because that is the preference that is allowed. I need for your support to support that, because that is what the Portland Housing Bureau's webpage states, but that is also what fair housing states I'm allowed to utilize, and that is what OHCS states I'm allowed to do. If the city states that there is a need, then we are allowed to do that, especially if it is racial. So we can specify. We can specify there's a need for more actual families of color in our city. And I believe I need to do this for both of our developments, both of our projects. I feel that the city should support it. We have the right to do it. The things I need clarification on and able to fulfill the rest of the vacancy is, how do I unitize being able to offer it to all? I'm dealing with multiple waiting lists and not having a clear understanding of how do I manage a wait list that I have no control over, when everybody else gives me control of the wait list, but I don't have control over one because there's no definition on how it's being operated. So those are barriers that I feel like are holding me back from being able to make this property successful. I am trying to make sure this property passes at 100% compliance, and that is the goal for Beatrice Morrow, and that is the goal for King Parks. And I plan on making sure that we meet the benchmarks that we'll set for King Parks as well, because we'll have a better understanding in the course of the next few months to set that property up to begin pre-leasing in the fall of this year and to meet those deadlines and pre-moving people in as soon as we receive the COO on King Parks. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from any of the Oversight Committee members? Then my first question would be, so just to be clear, I want to understand what you're saying when you're saying that you need permission to use preference. Are you saying to use something other than the preference policy? Is that what you're talking about? To do something other than that?
It would be utilizing it in depth is what I plan on doing, and that's the portion that I need the understanding for PHB to understand that. Because when we write the AFHMP plan, that's also reviewed by OHCS. That is what I have to comply with in our management plan. And in that, it states in 4B, a preference. So your preference that you state is to be utilized.
Just point of clarity. We're not the city.
No,
We're the
I understand.
oversight,
I have to comply with the state, number one. I have to comply with PHB, number two. As far as the tax credits, as far as the home funds, as far as this preference that we're allowing to fulfill in those home units, correct? So in that, I need to specify, I need to have clarity. If I'm using a wait list that has preferences on it, and I'm doing a preference policy on a community, I need clarity and definition. So I'm coming saying, I want to use a more in-depth preference for that community. So in accordance with what you guys are saying, there is a preference policy to establish housing back in the north and northeast corridor for people that have previously lived. I want to use that as a preference, but I want to piggyback on that preference and allowing families of color, because that is a need that PHB has specified on their website in writing, stating that there's a need for housing. And so that's what I would like to incorporate in my management plan, in my lease-up plan, and in my tenant selection plan.
Okay. Feedback before I don't want to dominate conversation, but feedback from any other members.
I do want to ask a question about the amount of money that the organization had to pay as a result of the delay. Going forward, is there any recourse for recouping that or a portion of that?
The capacity to recoup those expenditures is very slim. First of all, the project is financed to cover its expenses. It's not financed to cover losses right out that happen right as the project, before it even gets leased up. And so I don't know how that's going to happen. We're going to work really, really diligently to see if there is a way, run numbers to see if there is a way that PCRI can recoup that resource. And right now it's close to $300,000. And it's steady, accumulating because the building is not fully leased up as of this date.
Question?
You mentioned that there were more than one wait list. How many lists do you have, and what are the differences?
Being that the management for the property at the time was Cascade, and the fact that with any property in the community, it has to be opened up to all. And so as far as I know, PHB has their wait list as far as that, and then the property has a wait list because it is a property in the community. We can't restrict only those to be put on one wait list. So my strategy now is trying to figure out, how do I bring the two wait lists together? So that's something that right now, I've only been at the company a total of 9 days or 10, and trying to figure this out on how do I do this under fair housing? Because there was no definition ever given to state that the people that was on this preference wait list versus the community wait list. Nothing in writing has been said on how does this work. We can't close it off to the public during the actual initial lease-up period and say no one from the public can apply unless you only lived in the city prior to. That wasn't written. That wasn't stated. So the company did what they were supposed to do, and that was open it up for a lease-up stage.
So, and I appreciate that. So there was some of the clarity that I was going to begin to go into, and that was how much you know about the history of specifically this property as well as King Parks. So we've been around, the Oversight Committee has been around since 2015 specifically. And when that property was committed, it was committed within the parameters of the preference policy being used. So that's how it was dedicated, that's how it was NOFA'd, that's how it was put into possibility. When the property was being opened, and I was one of those people that was there with the mayor, who was Charlie Hills, and at that time, Commissioner Dan Saltzman. It was also stated that these dollars would be, that all of the people would go through this preference policy. And so that's why I was wanting to get some clarity around your statement related to wanting to implement a policy. Well, there's a policy there. And it's concerning to me when you communicate that there isn't clarity. And so needing to get then or establish that clarity, my first thought is to have the conversation to work through what those nuances are. I was intrigued by the implementation of the preference. I wrote it down. The implementation of the preference policy caused problems. And so my question would have been, well, what were those problems that were caused by the implementation of the policy? And then how do we resolve those problems? But you began to talk about implementing a new policy. So, for me, before we implement something new, let's talk about what the issues were with what's in place that's already been HUD approved, et cetera, et cetera. So,
I would have to go back, Chairman Holt, to see exactly what was in place when those resources were allocated for development of Northeast Portland to address the displacement that happened. I don't know if the preference policy, it may have become a part, but I don't know at the time that when I went in there, and yeah, for the NOFA, that was in place and fully defined. So I would have to confirm that. And then in addition, we got a preference policy. In addition to having the preference policy, you got federal and you got state guidelines that you have to comply. The way to do that is to take a look at all three of them together and see what would be a strategy so that you're making sure you're not violating the tax credit policy, you're not violating the other funding partners. Preference policy became number one. Preference policy, the city put in 29.4% of the resources that it cost to develop that project, and that included the land. The other 70.6% of that resources was private loans and tax credits. And so, irrespective of that, the guidance and the demands that we got were mostly from the city of Portland. We understand how to implement low-income housing tax credit lease-up. We understand how, if a funder is investing in low-income housing, what their expectations are. But then there's a preference policy, and the expectation was that we would only lease to people on the preference policy list. And the preference policy list didn't say whether they didn't talk about their income, which is the #1 criteria to be able to live in affordable housing. It didn't say anything about their household size. It didn't, it just knew that they had proven that they had been displaced or lived in North and Northeast Portland at one time. So there we are. So we get a list, and it's a list of names and categorized by, I guess, when they got on the policy. We don't know if they need a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom. We don't know what their needs are. So then we have to send out letters asking them, letting them know that they're on the list and their name has been selected and they can come in and complete an official application for the housing. And then you get all of these people. It takes us 7 applications to go through to find one resident. And right now there was no categorization. When the people came in, then we could know that they need a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or a studio. And so here we are, we've got a number of 1-bedroom apartments and studios that we haven't been able to lease because the people on the preference policy list that we're required to outreach to may not need a 1-bedroom or a studio. And so here we are, sitting here trying to lease up a building in the dark. And that is so, frustrating, yes, very much so, to have to go through that. And then, we had, at the Beach tomorrow, we had a man come in, lease the apartment, and then move his son in. He didn't move in. And so it's all those kinds of things that we traditionally do in our due diligence that because they were on the preference policy and we didn't do that lease up, by the way. It was done, it was one of the 7 or 8 that was done by the other management company. So here we are. I think I applaud the Bureau for trying to address the displacement that the city of Portland caused, but then I think that you cannot do something without involving the people who are expected to comply with those requirements. We know with federal low-income housing tax credits, we know what they expect of us. They don't hold our hand as we go through the process. They allow us to go through the process. Then after we're all done, a year or whatever into it, they'll come in and then they'll assess, or even as we go along, especially for the state, they'll check our files to make sure we're compliant with the law and the regulations. But you can't do something that important and base it only on one criteria, and that's the city's criteria.
So, and again, don't want to belabor the point, but just for point of clarification, in the process of establishing the preference policy, there were nonprofit partners invited to the table to help draft this, right? Because this is work that Portland Housing Bureau does not do or has not historically done. And so there was a gathering of nonprofit partners to participate in this process. in that participation of the process, and I'm just asking for my own clarity's sake, in the participation of the process, the things that you're highlighting now that were missed, were they weren't talked about as part of the policy and the need for it, since this is the work that the nonprofit partners do?
You didn't have development professionals on. I was on that panel for a brief period of time, and I removed myself from it because I thought that what the city was going to be putting residents through was just unnecessary. I just really felt like they had to go dig up old records. The city has access to more information about the residents in this city than we could ever do. So why wouldn't they use the resources that was available to them to make that determination versus having a resident go down to the city building, neighborhoods in places that they're not familiar with, that they don't traditionally go on a day-to-day basis, go into a bureaucratic establishment, which most of them don't like, unless you worked in that environment and know what it's like. You are intimidated by that process. You go in there, you're required to produce certain documents that proved your prior living status in these neighborhoods. And I ran into a gentleman, he told me he had to go to Gresham to get a document to prove he was divorced, and that he was already living in a PCRI property at Park Terrace. And he said, they didn't ask me for that when I was there, so this is a low-income housing tax credit project. The only difference was the preference policy. So here we are putting residents who've already been through so much through a process, to me, that I think is inequitable, I think is unfair, I think it is intimidating. And is that what you, members of this North-Northeast Committee, want to see people go through? You all control this process. And I would assume you were participating in it, just like you just asked me if I participated in it. I did, and I stopped. And I explained to them why I stopped. I am not going to be a part of putting anybody through that process. I'm not going to do it. And I left and never went back.
Okay, so I raised that to do two things. One is to kind of contextualize how we got here, but more importantly, and there were members from the Oversight Committee that were a part of the development of that, the preference policy. So we did have some members. I personally was not part of it, but there were a few of the members at that time who were a part of that work. But more importantly, at this moment, it's path forward. So how do we go forward? And that's why I asked the question about the implementation of the preference policy, and then I also was curious as to, is the preference policy being used for the home purchasing that the PCRI homes are building, or no? And then again, most importantly, path forward. And I'll speak to the last thing you said in just a moment.
I am the housing Resident Services Department is going to come in and speak to the challenges that they face every day with getting people qualified to participate in the preference policy. I think we can't create something for someone without at least hearing their voice, right? If you want to know what it is they need and what issues they're grappling with, you can't ask a table of professionals who work in the industry. You have to go right out to the community and ask them. They are so much better at explaining the problems that they're encountering and the support that they need to step up and out of the situation they deal with on a daily basis. And I think that that was a very important part that got missed. I think the Portland Housing Bureau could have went into the community and had applications taken. They could have had a station at the Urban League, SCI, PCRI. We could have, and perhaps you did, but it was PCRI's development, and we didn't know it. And if it's our development and we're providing 70% of the resources to make it possible, shouldn't we have known it? Shouldn't PCRI been one of those locations where people could come and fill out applications? In fact, we had applications, and the Portland Housing Bureau refused to even consider the applications that we had.
There's a large number of people that keep coming through the door on a regular basis, and they ask, I was never given in consideration to get on that preference list. We have people that are consistently saying this. We have people that Cascade has on the list that they created of interest, and of people that applied and put an application that we have to sit and hold and tell them you have to wait right now. And they're like, I used to live here. I was not given an opportunity. So we're running into some major issues because this list over here that has to sit and wait was not given that open door. So now this is another issue that we run into, and it's a huge complaint from the people in this community that live in this community or have lived in this community and are trying to come back in, and now they can't.
Any other comments from the, okay.
I'm trying to get clarification for myself, and with the two wait lists that you have, Portland Housing Bureau, I'm hearing from you that that list alone would not help you to fill the units. But the other list, if you could use it and it'd be approved to use it, could you fill the units and get people moved in? Is that what you're saying?
Of course, the time consumption, because it is a tax credit, we have requirements. So it takes longer right now to go through a list with least of information. It's going to take longer. You have to give that person time to respond. And now you have to go through the pre-qualifications to even start the qualifications, because you don't want somebody applying for something that they do not qualify at all for. So the information that Cascade went through, they went through the normal wait list process that we do in affordable housing. PHB did not do that normal wait list process in obtaining that information from each household. So that's what the difficulty we're running into. We have 60% studio units right now, and for me to figure this out on the wait list is going to take somebody the time. I cannot pull the newly appointed manager that I have going in there to sit there and make the phone calls at the same time she's trying to finish the rest of the other applications. One application can take anywhere between 1 to 14 days for approval. The paperwork alone takes anywhere from 8 to 21 hours just to do if you were to sit there and figure out the man labor hours. The income alone takes about 2 to 5 hours just to calculate correctly sometimes based upon the individual's income. So it's a lot of time process to do when you don't have just even simple estimated information or a household size. Just because there's one name down there, I don't know that that's a party of 1 or a party of 6. So that's where the issues we're running into with it.
Thank you very much. Work we are going to need to continue to do. So I appreciate your being here tonight. I want to hear from the home ownership group. Thank you. And we are at time, so don't want to rush you guys though. Yeah. Good evening. Hi.
Good evening. I'm Linda Tellis-Kennedy, Homeownership Program Coordinator at PCRI. And just want to give an update on the folks we're working with that came through the preference policy for our homeownership program that we were wanting to be able to purchase our first homes that we built for our for our Pathway 1000 initiative. We have 3 participants that have purchased homes. Out of 22 people that we had from the preference policy program, 3 participants purchased homes in the interstate URA in 2018. One of the 3 participants had an increase in her income while in the process and purchased using Prosper Portland funds. One participant inherited a home right outside of the URA, and it's in Northeast Portland, and she was really needing to use some funds to do upgrades and repairs on her home. But at the time, CDBG funds weren't considered, and so she ended up not being able to use her funds that she was from the preference policy because she inherited this home that was seriously like right outside of the Interstate URA. And 3 participants are in contract to purchase at the North Williams site, and 1 is currently working with the lender. 1 participant is in contract and the Interstate URA scheduled to close tomorrow, and 1 participant was rescinded. 12 participants are continuing to work on their mortgage readiness.
Yeah, it's good stuff. One of the things we wanted to talk about recently we were in the office and really evaluating where we were with more specifically the 12 participants that are still working in progress. And it occurred to us, we should probably just reach out because probably half a dozen of those individuals will not be prepared to purchase by the end of 2019, which when we last came together and really talked about the end of the period for people that was given, we needed to have a better understanding. When we had that meeting in December of last year, there was an extension I understood that was given, but that we needed to seek clarification on who that extension was granted to. So we reached out to find out whom that extension was granted to, because we knew, again, at least half of these individuals would not be prepared to purchase by the end of the year. Half of the 12. And so then we learned that that particular extension was only awarded to those participants, or maybe more specifically, the development, the 50-20 development, the other development that's currently happening with the other organizations. So part of what we wanted to talk about is what that meant. And so we subsequently learned that the individuals received a letter that they would need to reapply for preference should they not be ready or purchase their property by the end of 2019, which for some of the participants that we've heard from have caused a little bit of panic. Many of them have worked quite diligently over the last couple of years to prepare for this opportunity. And I just wanted to bring up the fact, I think we've talked about this before, just the amount of time and what it means to prepare our participants for this process is varied. But for the most part, we are looking at anywhere from 3, and sometimes many cases, 5 years in some cases, to prepare people from start to finish for homeownership. And I just want the Oversight Committee to really consider what that would be if the individuals who have come this far would then not have an opportunity to finish this process. And I'll give you an example. Things do happen with people just during this process. I mean, life happens. We had a woman who unfortunately lost her job in this process, and so was a temporary employee. And we know temporary employment does not fly when you are trying to apply for a mortgage. Fortunately, she has now obtained full-time employment, thankfully, but we know she will probably need at least another year at this point under her belt in order to check that mark, right? And so here she is in this process, but I will say, even in her temporary employment, she stayed engaged in the program, she continued to work with Linda, she continued to do what she could in preparation. I would hate to see, as I'm sure you would hate to see, that at the end of this year, that opportunity not continue to be granted to her. And there's other stories of people who have had things happen. I know at the beginning of this process, there were several people that came through that had challenges, and we had to identify who were in our best efforts, had the best opportunity, even given the challenges, to come out successful on the other side. We know there were some things that were just not likely that would, happen for people, but at our best efforts, we believed with some counseling, some, real proper budgeting and management, some savings, and most importantly, time, we could support these individuals to the end. And so I think we want to be able to figure out how we provide some more time, in essence, for these individuals.
So, Mike, I've got a real specific question for you, Andrea.
Yeah.
So, for the 6 families that won't be ready at the end of the year,
Right.
will they be ready when?
What would you say, Linda? That would probably be better.
Closer to 2 years, like maybe the end of next year or even by the end of the summer. One of the young ladies I know won't be ready until January because she...
January of 2020?
2020. And I want to bring up her story because she wanted to be here tonight to talk, but she had to work. She's working 2 jobs. And the reason why she's working 2 jobs is because she's trying to meet that 2019 deadline. And she's using the second job to pay $460 a month, which will end all of her debt by January, paying $460 a month. So it's an extra job to pay all of that off so she can be in better standing when come January. So it's a few of them that have that type of, like, they're really racing to get to this 2019 clock, and they just really need a little more time. I said 2 years to give them cushion, but by the end of the summer of next year.
So if you could help me on the list here, and we don't have to do it at this very moment, but if you could help me on the list, especially on those that we've got the nose on, if you could give me an idea of what kind of time frame are we talking about, right? I will speak for our heartbeat around the work. I agree with you, it would be detrimental, traumatic, nearly horrific to take people to a process, and then because of life's issues, they can't then benefit and have to start all over again. That would just be difficult. So I think there may be some way to mitigate that as we think through it and process, but communication is going to be key, right? So that there's some sense of mutual strategy. At least that's what's in my mind, but I defer to hear from my committee members. Weigh in any committee member mindset, thought, question, comment.
If it's within our power to just grant an extension to those families, I vote yes.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Your thoughts about it. We're not doing a vote or anything like that, but I thank you. Yeah. No thoughts, no comment. Yes.
I would go along with Dr. Edwards and say to get people involved in the process, and for some reason an interruption comes out of their control, there should be some type of plan to give an extension or to allow, and especially where they show good faith efforts in trying to maintain and continue the home ownership program. That's a big investment.
Dr. Bates, any comment?
So to this specific issue, I think that, I guess I'm not totally clear on if the deadline has to do with some expiration of the actual funds. And so what could be done to like swap out a different color of money? What are the options, right?
It's the award and then the extension of the award when it was originally granted.
But the underlying money isn't like disappearing at a certain date. Oh, okay. Well, great. That's good to hear. Seems solvable. The question that I had was actually about the previous component, about the rental lease up. Can I ask that question, or have we moved on? We're obviously not going to answer the question now, so maybe this is for future time clarification. Fully acknowledging that I am not a tenant lease up, I'm not a rental lease up manager. That's not my job. I just want to understand a little bit. I'm hoping we can get some kind of like level set on how this usually works, because from an external perspective, it seems like programmed buildings have processes for applying that one can't just walk up to it and apply it to the building, to a home forward, or if it's for people transitioning from homelessness, or it's for people who have a preference policy, or it's funded by, that there's not just like a come in and say you're interested in the same way that there is for a private building. And so trying to just have a level set understanding of how that works generally, and why there would be sort of this other list hanging out on site. I want to understand that more in the profession. I take very seriously the reality that all of our programs for people who are low income involve like what can be an onerous and sometimes dehumanizing process of documentation verification and going to talk to specific people in a specific place at a specific time and being eligible and not being eligible and having to do things in a certain procedure. That's very true. And so to the extent that we can understand how to make those things less so for people in this policy, I think that's really important. I remain a bit confused about, or I'm seeking clarity on, the request to create a multi-layered policy that has preference and more things. And so to the extent that there was a request for sort of clarity and a reference from Ms. Michelle about, writing out these plans, if those are written out, what that proposal is, I think it would be helpful to look at it as written, because I'm having a hard time envisioning what this hybrid thing looks like or exactly what problem it's intended to solve. The problem of difficulty with documentation applications does not seem to me to be related to that. The question of can there be layered preference, but for me, the sort of multiple problems kind of overlapping got a little bit confounding there.
Thank you very much, and I think it was important to get that recorded so that we could at least identify that. And Dr. Edwards, yeah. I think we're still on.
Dr. Bates, I did want to make one brief clarification. The Portland Housing Bureau, some of the folks on this list look like they could very easily be potentially over income and wanting to use some of the funds that have been available to us from Prosper Portland, depending on the time that they're buying and the household size and the other parameters. And there are, those funds are limited and are being used up and assigned to preference. So we are going to need to have communication between PCRI and the Housing Bureau to ensure that we're lining folks up to potential opportunity, because there are some chances that money that people may be assuming are available will be used up by other families, and that would be a bad thing, obviously, if you're working with someone. So I think making sure that you're communicating about where you think you are with your timeline with Ms. Dana Shepherd would be really the best to make sure that we don't miss someone. I wanted to put that out there. So.
Okay.
And that's how I was going to wrap it up. To make sure that we are optimizing the greatest opportunity, then heightening the communication around this, and then further, and not to dialogue about it at this moment, but further just the strategy that you have in mind to present, right, about how to help families. So thank you very much. Good to see you guys. Appreciate it. All right.
Excuse me, we haven't heard from Pastor Bethel.
Yes.
If he had any feedback or comments.
I'm good on this.
Thank you very much. We're going to invite Diane Lynn, proud crowd, come and join us. And I know we're all kind of looking at the clock, but you will have your half hour.
may or may not need that whole period of time. But good evening, everyone. We're just thrilled to be here with you tonight. My name is Diane Lynn. I'm Executive Director of Proud Ground. Just before we start on the update on the condo project, I do want to briefly mention that we have 2 single-family homes available in Northeast Portland and are awaiting families that are in the queue from the preference policy to purchase those 2 homes. We know that condos aren't best for everybody, and we hope the homes can be purchased by families sometime very soon. We appreciate the City of Portland's partnership with us in purchasing the few out there that we can get.
And not at this moment, but if you give us information about the size of those homes, where they're located, all that.
Absolutely.
Thank
Happy
you.
to do that. So you all know Jeannie Woolley, I hope, by now, and we did not invite our entire team tonight, but we have introduced them in the past. Steve Messinetti is here from Habitat for Humanity, and if you all have questions for him, he's also available here tonight. The first couple slides, do you have the slides up? PowerPoint? Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to click them. Okay.
Diane,
Here we
you
go.
are in control of the clicker.
Technologically. Okay. Excuse me. We made some minor changes to this presentation, so what's in your packet is close, but we did make some updates based on some new information that we had available to us, and we wanted this to be as accurate as possible for you here tonight. Much of this information you have heard before, but we do want to keep reiterating the overview of the project, which is these data points. Again, 64-unit building, 40 units will be permanently affordable. Again, you know the size of the lot, the common space, the building. You'll hear a little bit more from Gina about some updates that we've had to make based on a variety of steps of the process that we're facing. The affordability levels, we have updated, and you'll hear, again, a little bit more about this too, some of the pricing. We wanted this to be accurate. This is one of the changes. One of the things that have affected this is the condo fees. We think we're going to be able to be more and more accurate about that, and we will stay within the level of affordability for the families we're working with, but the price points have been adjusted, which generates more revenue for the project, which is a good thing on both ends. It will not affect the applicants in terms of how much they'll actually pay out in terms of percentage of their income. So these are, again, estimates based on our best projections for what these units will be able to pull on the market. We think HUD has very recently updated the AMI levels, and that will also be reflected in this work. You already know, I believe, the team that's involved in this project, and we're thrilled to be working with Carlton Hart and LMC. Housing Development Center has been with us every step of the way. Of course, again, Habitat and Gina. And at this stage, I'm going to turn it over to Gina to talk about project updates.
Good evening, everybody. We've had several things happen since the last time we were before you. We've essentially completed major outreach for the preference policy in conjunction with PHB, but we did reach out to some of the comments that I heard from the group earlier, the committee earlier. We did actually meet with several of the organizations in the community that serve Black families and make them aware of the preference policy process. And I think the Housing Bureau came behind us, and there was a double hit on some of those. But we really wanted to make sure that we had a pipeline so we don't end up with the kind of issues that some others have had. We need a pipeline because, as has been stated, we don't control that pipeline. The Bureau and the Portland Housing Center will ready those people for purchasing, and we need to, we can't set on units once they're built for past the point of time that we're talking about. So we really wanted to help augment the process, and so we got out there and beat the bushes, talked to a lot of people in the community to get, to make it understood that it was critical for people to get on the list if they had any thought that they might want to be considered for purchasing one of the condos in 5020. We worked all the month of April doing that outreach. We've reviewed the condo pricing. We're in the process of reevaluating that. So since this project takes 2.5 years to bring to market, everything changes. We have to update those every time we have pro forma changes. We have to look at how everything's going to fit together. And and the income levels, as Diane's already talked about, will change each year. The HUD will publish new numbers for the affordability levels. So we'll have another update next year, at the first of next year, based on that information. And because the affordability of the mortgages, the taxes, the condo fees, and the has to all fit together, and the insurance for the housing has to all fit within that affordability level. The cost for those monthly expenses has to fit within that affordability level. We have to keep updating that information to make sure that we don't end up with, with costs that people are not going to be able to afford as we've represented. So we'll keep updating that information as well. We've updated the condo unit pricing as a result of some of this information that got published by HUD recently. We've applied for we started through design review, and we basically through that design review process, we've had many back and forths with the Bureau of Development Services, and there have been things that they want us to augment, so that's sort of extended, that's taken time, that's design cost increase to try to address all of the concerns for meeting the design standards. So we've been going through that process, and as a result of that, one of the requirements, the new requirements, is that for buildings that are on major commercial boulevards like Interstate, they want commercial storefront, a certain percentage of the ground floor to be commercial storefront. So we've had to increase the commercial space that we have in this building, which means that takes away from housing units that's another need. It may not make this project the best and highest use from a housing standpoint. That commercial space has to be leased or sold as part of the condo project in order to make it all pencil out. So we've lost 2 parking spaces because they wanted us to move around our things like our building generator, and they didn't like where it was placed. And so these are the kind of things that you go through that are normal in any development process, but for an affordable housing project that is trying to fit the jigsaw puzzle together all the time, and we're in the middle of pre-development, which means our costs aren't settled down. All of this stuff causes you to have to put the puzzle back together. We've been working, we're working towards a 75% plan set, which means when we get to that, we'll be able to be more certain of whether the construction costs are going to settle down. So we have that plan set that once we get through design review and we know what we're going to be allowed to build, we'll be able to finish up that plan set and then have it estimated by our contractor to understand where our costs are settling in. And then we're working on our construction loan because, quite frankly, you can do all this work, and if you can't get a construction loan to build it, which is, in our case, it's a little bit different because there aren't money like low-income housing tax credits to build ownership product, and so essentially the process of financing is totally different. And so we're working with banks to see who is interested in doing this deal, and then what that means, what kind of lender requirements they're going to put on us in order to lend us the money to build the building. And then finally, we've been working with PHB to kind of resolve deal issues. There's a lot of, this is a very complex deal. It has a land trust, it has a condominium structure. It has funders that need to have, some tether to the land, and we have to figure all of that out and where everybody is, what everybody needs, and we're in the process of doing that with PHB and with the state, because we have lift dollars in this process, in the building, in our financing capital stack as well.
So just a couple more slides, really, as an update. We also want to take a few minutes of your time this evening to respond to a couple issues that came up in the March meeting. We listened to the tape of that meeting, and we heard that there were a few questions, so we're anticipating that. There is a slide here on the preference policy process that Gina mentioned. I won't go over the same information again, but we did work pretty hard to, again, make sure people knew that in that 2-week window they needed to sign up. And this slide indicates the kind of effort that we put into that. The final result of that effort was to produce 647 families that are signed up for this product in the preference policy, and our commitment is to make sure that we do everything humanly possible to match those families to these units in partnership with the other agencies we're working with. The project schedule is pretty much what we've provided in the past, while there's always slippage and different things that affect it, of course. And when we hear of anything that is significant, we'll be sure and let you all know. The certificate of occupancy on this building, we hope will be around February of 2021, and we hope to complete sales within the year, if not sooner than that. This is a recap of the project features. This building really does represent kind of a gold standard of a lot of different community values, from energy efficiency to transit-oriented development. We appreciate Metro's involvement with a Todd grant on the project, LEED Gold Earth Advantage standards. The units have really all the amenities for families, and we're really, and thanks to Gina and the hard work of the team, we're really trying to keep our eye on the long-term durability of the building and the importance of the outdoor space for children. We want to keep an eye on the importance of parking. We've heard that from community members, that a few people are going to want access to parking, even though this building is not required to provide that. But we know, in fact, there are people on the preference policy list in the queue that have accessibility issues, and we need to have them be able to get into the building. In the final analysis, we again intend to build an intentional community here in this space, with people making as little as $32,000 a year up to, really whatever the market will bear. So we're really expecting a wonderful kind of outcome in the end. In answer to a couple questions that came up, again, I know the community land trust is always a little bit of a complicating factor, and really we're happy to talk to any of you individually about how that fits into this kind of project. The simplest way to describe it, land aside for now, is we have an affordability covenant with every single buyer in the building that of the 40 units that are permanently affordable, and that affordability covenant, which is essentially a deed restriction, it says that we got to be with you when you sell the unit to make sure that unit's going to be sold to the next income qualified family, and that the family that's selling gets the amount that they have earned in equity out of that unit precisely, and that it's ready for the next income qualified family to follow it, and this will happen in perpetuity into the future. I think Dr. Bates and others had mentioned issues around the condo association. I've checked in a little bit. Gina's really been taking the lead with the condo structure issues. I would say that we've got every intention, because I think that's why the outreach effort was so very important, to bring the community to the preference policy process, so that we have a critical mass of people from the community looking to come back to the neighborhood. And if we achieve that, we'll have families that will be eligible to serve on the board of the condo association. We cannot, by law, kind of dictate that process internally. That's got to happen with the condo association members, and Proud Ground will likely, depends on a few issues, but not be necessarily a condo association member. So we really do understand what we're trying to achieve here with a mixed income project, and we will do everything again in our power to help empower the preference policy families to play a leadership role in the condo association within the letter of the law.
So I want to read from the March meeting. I think, Diane, everyone on the committee now fully understands the CLT model. The question, very basically, I mean, maybe the viewers at home don't, but if we can fast forward rather than having individual conversations, the basic question was, end of day, is this building in the Proud Ground Land Trust or not?
Well, the 40 units will be in the Proud Ground portfolio, all 40 units, but not the market rate units. They are going to be, they'll likely have a land lease under them, but they will not be part of the community land trust portfolio.
Yeah, we got to explain this more clearly, because we get that, like, a CLT is kind of like a condo already, in that you own a thing, but you don't own all the things. Now you got a condo on it in which you have units, there's a building, it's a condo association, there's land underneath it. So give me the baseline skinny on who owns the land, who owns the building, who owns the unit, and on from there.
I simply cannot answer the question, as Shannon well knows, about who will own this land. That is something I'm happy to bring back to you. We will explain that. So let's set aside, again, the land ownership question. We do have other condos out there, and they're more and more being built, where some of the condos are community land trust, permanently affordable, and some are market rate. In fact, we're testing more and more the mixed income model through the Habitat model and in partnership with them. So 40 of these units will be community land trust units, and the market rate units will not be. Is that?
No, it's not going to answer a question.
I just can't answer the question. I'm sorry about the land ownership yet.
I think that Diane's right about the land issue. That's one of the structuring issues that we need to work out. But the bottom line is that the land will be held in trust in some form. So you should know that, and that's part of what allows it to be permanently affordable. So that's going to happen. So it means that it will be held in trust, and everybody will have a portion of that, but they won't really be able to gain upside or equity related to that, to the land, although it won't be that pure. But they will, in a condo association, of course, you just own what's between the walls. And the association, which is all the owners, they own the shell, they own all the common areas in common. And so, that's the way it's going to work. And we don't know exactly who's going to have the tither on the land, but whoever has the tither on the land, it will still, because of the land trust, it'll still have those covenants that will, allow it to be permanently affordable.
Okay, and so then this is again just like following on to what we were talking about in March, because y'all weren't here and we had a fun speculative time by ourselves. So the condo association is going to own the building, and the condo association will include people both at market rate and people who are in a deed restricted unit, and will not include Proud Ground.
Unless we have a role in the commercial space, and we are exploring that, we would not, as it relates to the housing units.
Okay.
No.
So I'm just going to repeat the question again. I really want to I hear you say we're going to do what we can do to empower people, but I really want a very specific action plan. Like, I want to know the steps, the people, the facilitators, the program. I want to know very specifically in detail what you are going to be doing to have an equitable governance of a building that is mixed income is great and intentions are great. We all go to neighborhood association and see how it rolls in Northeast Portland. We know how processes work when there are dramatic class and probably race differentials in them. So I really want to hear some very specific things that you are going to set up in place for your buyers, and to facilitate that condo association to get them to work in a way that works for the people who are coming through the preference policy?
And I think that's a fair question, Dr. Bates, and you will, but we aren't there yet. I mean, that's kind of a next, once we get through getting the plans done, then we're gonna have a whole year while we're gonna have 15 months while we're doing construction, and that's at the point at which we will start looking at the condo association, and we'll spend the legal dollars to set that up. It's not an action item at this point in the process, but you guys will see everything. Will come back to you, and we'll have the benefit of our condo lawyer having told us what we can and can't do. We just haven't done that work yet.
That's great. I appreciate that, and I look forward to that. Please get more than a lawyer, because you need people who really understand how to set up processes in equitable ways, because this is going to be a governance process that lasts on far beyond the initial setup. So what governance, practices, what trainings do people need to undergo? Not just the people who are low-income buyers who need to be capacitated to participate in the condo association, but your market rate buyers who need to be capacitated to participate with people across class boundaries. So go beyond the lawyers, but that's fine. We'll find out about it during that whole long period of time, and I really look forward to it. My final question is, what is it that we can do, and this might be a question to Director Callahan, how can we as an oversight committee or Thinking Humans help to support in the conversations with BDS what I find to be an absurd ask to reduce residential space in favor of commercial space in a city that clearly has a glut of neighborhood commercial space in new buildings, especially in Northeast Portland corridors. Because you can drive up North Williams from here and look at block after block of for lease signs, and it no longer makes sense from a planning perspective. Buildings can be residential on the ground floor and have a lobby. So how can we support that? Because I think that's going to create some significant problems for, I would imagine it's creating problems for market rate projects as well at this point, given those vacancy rates.
And I will add, in a housing crisis.
Thank you, Dr. Bates, for the question. So BDS, just to clarify, is the enforcement agency for the city code, which is proffered by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and passed by City Council. So the Bureau of Planning and Development Services is only going to be asking for what is generally required by code and allowed by the zoning law. So, and with that, I will say we are working, our staff, we have a staff member assigned to each of the projects that works hand in hand through the development process to help ease things as much as possible. And I apologize, I don't know who your construction coordinator is. It's Fayez. And in terms of your specific action to change or address city code, I'd have to come back with you and look at that, because they've actually recently made additional changes to code in the last comprehensive plan to actually update and ask for more commercial so that there is more commercially activated ground space. But I would have to talk to the team more fully to see if there were any places that we could pull triggers at all, because frankly, I have not been in the weeds with them on the development details.
So what I will say to you is we're in design review, and what has happened is we have competing interests, as you know, whenever you're building this. So the neighborhood associations want more commercial because they don't want long corridors of housing with no activation at the street level. That's reasonable. The problem is that at this point, having to create more bike parking, more this, more that, there's multiple goals that the city's working on. All of them have merit, but all of those things are going into, they're taking up space in new developments. And that space, you have to make space for that, or you really don't get through design review. And I think that part of what needs to happen is there needs to be at least some feedback that these projects are very hard to glue together and to keep glued together all the way through a pre-development process. And when you keep tacking on new requirements that they have to meet that doesn't have to do with the mission, the underlying mission of what we're doing this work for, it does complicate the process.
I would add that we are doing a review of the final decision by design review, and very well might, out of principle to a large extent, appeal that decision, because there were arbitrary, in my opinion, decisions made to add cost and complication of this project that were wholly unnecessary. And it would be helpful if we get to a point, if we could share that with you, to weigh in on the importance of staying on point with the very critical importance of what this building is trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. Comments at all? Thanks for being here tonight. Before you leave, are you still excited about the project?
We're very excited about the
Having
project,
fun?
and thank you for hearing us out tonight.
Layers and layers and layers. You're the ones to handle it. Great.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
we're going to have to stay connected because the work is too central and essential for us to do. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right. Oh, and Diane, don't forget to get us the address of the 2 homes that are available. Thank you. And now, Dr. Bates, you want to come on this side so you can play with the clicker? We can join us and introduce who is with you tonight. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Ami Thurber, Assistant Professor of Social Work at Portland State. And glad to be with you. Thanks for fitting us in on a full agenda. Yeah. So we are here to talk with you about a proposal to evaluate the impact of the preference policy. So, yeah, and in particular, you know, because though there may be dilemmas in getting people into units, you do already have people in units. And so in the last year, Dr. Bates and I started talking with the Housing Bureau about how we might study the work that's already being done to understand what people's experience is like in the coming back into the community. And so we wanted to share the plan we have developed so far with you, get your input on that plan tonight. So to provide just a little bit of context, there's a few different reasons why it seems like this is really important to study. And first is really because the policy has been designed, as we've been talking about all evening, to serve a particular population of folks that have been displaced from the neighborhood in the past, and it's critical to know how it's working for people. You yourselves wrote in your 2017 report that we need to make sure that families can do more than just survive, that more than just exist. And the only way we can find out how they're experiencing the neighborhood is to really ask them. So we would like to hear directly from residents. We think that would be of value to you as the Oversight Committee. We hope it would be of value to the Housing Bureau so that they can evaluate the policy. We hope that it might identify some possibilities for collaboration that could enrich the experiences of residents as they move back in. For instance, we might learn that there's, similar to what Dr. Bates was just flagging, that there's a need for more intentional kinds of community building or governance in communities. Some of that might be beyond the charge of the Housing Bureau, but completely in the wheelhouse of other local groups to help support, and so we might be able to identify some opportunities for collaboration. We also are aware that there is a lot of national interest in what's happening here in Portland. And so the patterns of displacement and gentrification here are not unique to Portland. There are cities paying attention to this. This is a first of its kind. Of course, there are kinks to work out, but people are tracking it. They want to know if it's working. They want to know, how it's working, and we want to be able to share that.
Yeah, and I can say that from being part of this conversation on a national scale through some of the policy intermediaries and with other practitioners, the heart of the question that people have is actually not about how the points are allocated or how the wait list works. It's how are people? Mm-hmm. How are people experiencing this? Mm-hmm. Is it okay for them? Mm-hmm. Are they happy with it? Mm-hmm. And they really want to understand, like, is this a tool that will lift people up, even given all the changes that they see around in their community. So that's really kind of the heart and the crux of what we're talking about.
So our goal is to gather information from residents, to ask them, first, what were your motivations for wanting to apply? Did you just want affordable housing, or was there something about this being part of the community that mattered? Because that matters to how they're going to experience coming back. We want to know about perspectives about the neighborhood, how it feels, about the sense of community, about their feeling of community well-being. And we want to know if they have recommendations to improve the social life, the cultural life, the kind of vitality of the community. This is not an evaluation about how they feel about the quality of their housing. It's not an evaluation of housing providers. It's really just what Lisa said, getting at the heart of what this policy was about. People lost more than just homes. They lost a sense of community. We want to know what it's feeling like as people move back into these homes, and if there's ways we can support that in a deeper sense. So our plan is to gather data in a few different ways. We want to survey folks. We want to conduct interviews. We want to conduct focus groups in each of the buildings. We'd like to survey as many of the residents who returned as possible, and then talk to a smaller number, one-on-one or in small groups. And to do so this summer, and to get some sort of baseline data about these early experiences, and then analyze that data into the fall, and hopefully be able to report back to you, by the end of the year about what we're finding. So at this point, Dr. Bates and I will be involved in the study. We have a couple other faculty colleagues and some graduate students who also hope to be involved in the study. And we know that this obviously requires a strong partnership with the housing partners, but we also felt like it was important to start with you as the Oversight Committee, and let you know sort of this vision, and then we need to work with them to find out what are the most appropriate ways to access the building, to meeting spaces, to interface with residents. So I know that time is of the essence this evening, but we definitely wanted to hear from you. What do you most want to learn from residents? This is an important opportunity for you to get your own questions answered. Certainly if you have questions about the study design and methods, feel free to ask those. And if you have thoughts about how we might share what we learn, or who we might share, with whom we might share, we welcome that as well.
Well, I will begin by saying I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. Speaks into a lot of the concern that's driven our work. Our work isn't about sticks and bricks, it's about people. And one of the frustrations I have sitting in this seat is that our work is limited to facilities. And in our inception around this group, and I wish PCRI was still here to hear some of the information. Is often part of the handcuffing moment is you get the problem, but we don't always get a chance to understand the context and or address some of the solutions. So in the inception, under a different director, one of the things we talked about was starting with $20 million, but it growing to $200 million. We talked about taking advantage of zombie homes. We talked about building partnerships and relationships with banks. And so the whole concept was that this was a community effort. It wasn't just a city-led effort. It wasn't just tax increment financing. It was something that was owned by a broader group, right? But we've been limited, and I use the term handcuffed because we've been kind of working from the tool we've been given. All of that to go back to say the reason that, for me, that keeps me volunteering for 5 years after agreeing for 4 meetings was kept me. Did I say volunteering? Did I mention that? What's kept me coming is the fact that people matter. That at the end of the day, this is about the people. And so I'm concerned about the frustrations the partners are having and the processes and so forth. But honestly, this is not about you. It's not about your frustrations. It's not about your difficulties. It's about the people we're impacting. So let's get past ourselves to figure out how we're impacting people. And so I'm extremely intrigued about this information and how people are getting reacclimated. Can they thrive in this environment that they're returning to? Are they being welcomed? Part of what we talked about, and I know I'm going on, but I can, I'm the chair. Part of what we talked about was doing some work around acclimating communities to one another and how we go about doing that. So not just talking to the individuals themselves who've moved back in, but also talking to those individuals who are paying market rate, living across the street, who may not understand or value the reason for this affordable unit, have no context, no history. So for me, it's spot on, and I'm in full support of the idea. So those are my 7 cents.
I think it's a great idea too, and I think we've been getting calls from Austin and Houston and all of these other cities that are doing similar stuff, so it would be helpful for us to have our own project. I would love to know some of the questions that you're thinking about to include on this survey. Is it more about ease of process? Is it more about awareness? And while I agree it's not necessarily about the agencies, but that frustration transfers to people. And so we have to, some way, I think, getting information from agencies that work with the potential residents would be an important piece to include in the study. I thought I wrote something else. And the other question I had, you will talk to folks who've gone through the process. I'd also be interested in those who didn't and trying to understand why, or maybe started and didn't complete it. We may be able to learn a lot more about the process from those who didn't get through it or chose not to use it.
And you raise a very key point. What's the narrative? What's the narrative that's being communicated to the people that are in this process? Because I agree, it's definitely transferred. Marlon, your thoughts? None? Sister Virgin?
I'm really excited about it. We started with the people. We went out and talked about it when it was small. It was big to us, but small to the community. And it's about time we got input from the community, as well as those that are in business, operating, contractors. I think everyone that's participated in this needs to have a voice and comment on how this is working or not working for them.
Dr. Bethel.
I support the idea. It's an excellent one to do. What I would be looking for, what were or are the barriers that individuals faced, and how can we devise something to help overcome those barriers? And it will be good to have an evaluation of the process, because it will keep a lot of speculation down. We'll have something in writing that we can refer to. So next week I'll be looking for your report. Thank you.
You gave him a week. I was expecting tomorrow afternoon.
Dr. Bethel, can I ask you a question? When you said what barriers are individuals facing, do you mean in the process of going through to apply for housing, or in returning to the neighborhood?
Both. If we're going to understand the preference policy and the effect that it's had on people, we need to know if there were any barriers for them applying for housing or going through the policy. And then number two, what might be the barriers of them coming back into the community and living.
And just one more thing, I know that the focus is on the residents and their experience, but I would also be curious what impact it's had on the community. They're not coming back to the same place they left. And so what is that experience for the rest of the folks around?
That's extremely important. It might be good to set a sense of the scope of our project. So we have a small amount of pilot funding from Portland State University to begin this work, and we see this as a long-term and expanding set of projects. When Dr. Thurber was talking about some of the other folks, colleagues from public health who have a very broad sense of health and well-being, and colleagues from other departments who can sort of fill in many pieces. And I think, so thinking about what is the impact on the community as a whole would be sort of very natural next step. But we want to kind of get some work going It's definitely my hope, again, from having these conversations around the country, including with, the cities are calling to ask about it, but also really significant philanthropic funders are very interested in this. I've talked about this on the other side of the table, being very committed to and interested in helping to lift up, applications or proposals to bolster and supplement to keep bringing in more money on the community development side. And so I hope that we can keep doing that and iterating that and really get a much bigger picture where we've talked about individual well-being, family well-being, community-wide well-being.
And I guess I'd just add that I think it is really important to study impact if we're gonna develop policy, and partly we have to put money behind that. So for instance, the seed funding we got largely will support being able to give stipends to people for interviews, focus groups, surveys, so we're compensating people for their time. And similarly, if we want to talk to more people, we need to be mindful about how we do that. And so just putting resource behind that effort. But we're very excited to get going.
We're excited about it. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming tonight. We appreciate it. Appreciate the work. I do not have any people signed up.
I have one announcement.
Okay. I do not have any people signed up in terms of public comment. So thank you, everyone who's come. We're going to be wrapping up here on time, it looks like. So, but before you go, there are two things. There's the announcement from Leslie and then a comment I want to make.
So I just wanted to give an update on where we are with our home ownership goals. I think in March we gave an update, but right now we have a total of 16 families have closed on homes. We had 5 using citywide CET, 8 with Northeast Resources, and 3 with Prosper Portland funding. We have 4 that purchased either outside the URA or bought with no subsidy. We have 6 that are pending currently that are due to close in the next couple of weeks. And so that gets us to a total of 26 that will have closed by the end of this month. And 100% of the households are African American, and the average median family income is 83%. So the last thing is that PHC recently held an info session for 15 additional participants. So I know Shalonda at PHC is very goal-oriented, and her goal is to get to 65 by the end of 2019. So she's been working very diligently.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. Let me close with a request. I have a request to those of us who are here. I mentioned kind of jokingly that I've been at this for 5 years, and several of us sitting around the table have been at this for quite some time and giving ourselves to this work. But in all sincerity, my request is this. Let me preface it by saying this isn't an easy process, and it is the first of its kind, and any of us who have done anything professionally, organizationally, in terms of development, the first iteration of a thing always is a learning process. We get better as we go. My ask is that we function from the attitude of collaboration. How do we help each other be successful? There's no one coming into this space that are enemies, or at least shouldn't be. We're trying to help people. Let's keep the main thing the main thing. We'll work through the issues. We'll work through the problems. We're going to have them, guaranteed. Let's keep the main thing the main thing. My ask is that that be your story, that be what you share, and that be what you correct when the rumor mill goes around and the other messages are being iterated, that you bring people back to the core. You know what? We're all trying to do something good. Let's figure out how to do that. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your commitment. Have a great evening.